Hi students, today we're going to talk about virtue ethics. Just briefly, I want to introduce you to this set of concepts. And this ethical theory is basically many different ethical theories, which all concentrate on moral development and moral character. So by the end of this module, I hope you can just briefly explain what virtue ethics is, give strengths of and common objections to virtue ethics as well as a theory, explain the moral significance of certain virtues, and identify and assess definitions for moral virtues. So here I'm going to start with just a double arrow as a timeline, and I'm going to point out that we have Confucius first. Okay, Confucius is a Chinese philosopher living in Khufu, China, and in there at the beginning he starts out there, and he and his merry band of scholars who are following him around go from these different regions to different regions, looking for somebody who will lead in a particular way, a benevolent ruler who sets an example, a moral example for his kingdom, okay, by being a virtuous person. So that's Confucius's idea, very briefly. Then we have Socrates in Greece, okay, so we can look at this map here, and it's got a map of the world, and it points out where Khufu, China is, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I apologize. And then we can look very far away is Greece, where Socrates, Aristotle, Hipparchia, etc., where those philosophers are. Now, you may, as a student, if you have been listening to my modules so far, and we're now going to go on to Aristotle, you might say, well, wait a minute, Professor, you skipped Plato. And I'll just mention that, yeah, I talked about Socrates, so yeah, that's as much Plato as you're going to get from me. Now, this is a photo of a statue of Socrates and Confucius in the Agora, which is where Socrates went around and spoke about how to become virtuous. This is, yeah, that's the Agora, the ancient marketplace in Athens, which you can go visit if you want, because they preserved it in its ruination. So virtue ethics focuses on, as I mentioned before, moral character and moral development. Okay, so it's looking at, instead of how to act per particular incident or situation, it's going to be more of a long-term strategy of who do you want to become, who do you want to be. So moral virtue is a characteristic, it's meaning a fixed behavior, something predictable, a disposition, meaning a way somebody tends to behave naturally or now habituated when faced with moral choices. Virtue requires practice. So I'm going to use Alistair MacIntyre. I'll use another philosopher's definition. I believe it's Alistair MacIntyre's. I don't want to get this wrong, but he gets into the theory of what a practice is. Okay, so to be morally good, the idea here is, particularly following Aristotle, who we'll talk about later, you become good by practicing good behavior. Okay, you're not necessarily born with these skills at navigating the way the world is. So a practice involves standards of excellence. So we're going to talk about what a person ideally would do or should do in a particular situation. Obedience to rules. So the person has to have within them the moral rules for behaving so that they, well, for practicing moral behavior. But if you are practicing, for example, how to become good at painting, okay, there are rules about how to hold your brush and how to do your brush strokes for different ways of delivering paint to canvas. So obedience to rules, and those rules have to be within. So you have to be able to conjure them up for yourself, even when nobody's there. Okay, so Finally, achievement of goods. You're practicing for particular goals to get some good in the end. Okay. For morality, it's to become a good person. Okay. Or to achieve social cohesion, things like that. Okay. But virtue requires practice. So you have to have these standards, you have to obey rules, and you have to be trying to achieve certain goods. Virtue ethics seeks to answer, who should I become? This is a photograph of Philippa Foot, a 20th century philosopher, British philosopher, who is a neo-Aristotelian. Neo meaning new, so she adapted his theory to contemporary philosophy. And she's a virtue ethicist. So I'm going to quote her in a minute. Virtues have to do with motivations, not just action. Okay, so it can't just be about I'm going to do this because I want to behave a certain way, right? Act a certain way. It has to reform the way you think about how you're motivated. Okay, what goal you're doing internally. Virtues are corrective, each one standing at a point at which there is some temptation to be resisted or deficiency of motivation to be made good. Okay, so these are often there at crucial times. Okay, it would pop up where you're forced to make a decision that's a moral decision, and you could make it this way or that way. So like moral dilemmas. Okay. And the temptation almost always is preserving peace, okay, right, not incurring too much labor, sort of generally being a person costs a lot. So if we think about it, the temptation to do nothing could be the thing that you have to resist to become a good person, okay? Examples of moral virtues are temperance, patience, integrity, and moral courage. So, what is true about moral virtues? A, moral virtues are habits of mind. B, acquiring moral virtues requires practice. C, moral virtues are about self-correction. D, all of the above. Next, I want to introduce the concept of a moral exemplar. A moral exemplar, exemplar comes from the root of the same thing as example, okay, or exemplify. So this is someone who serves as an excellent model of good conduct and is worthy of imitation. So active reflection, I want you to just think of someone who serves as a moral exemplar in your life or for many people, like for the world. What character traits do they have that are ideal or excellent? Our own philosopher, our own meaning our American philosopher, Benjamin Franklin, very interestingly, when he was, I think he was in his 20s, he fashioned a list of virtues that he thought he should develop towards having as a person, that he should work on for himself. Not only did he create this list, but he ordered it in terms of how hard psychologically it would be for him to overcome his normal temptations and habits of mind to become a better person. So while ideally I would say, okay, take a minute and do this inventory for yourself, let's instead look at Ben Franklin's moral virtue imperatives. Now, here he's taking these concepts and he's creating them into imperatives instead of into principles, which I find very interesting. So we're going to just examine a couple of these, and I'm going to ask you some questions. I really want you to deeply consider these questions I'm asking. So first, he defines silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Trifling means trivial. Industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary action. Sincerity, use no hurtful deceit, think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Tranquility, be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. So, which virtues are the most important morally? Silence, industry, sincerity, or tranquility? Okay, I want you to tell me why you think that's the case. Are any not morally necessary? And if so, why not? How would you define the virtues of silence, industry, sincerity, or tranquility? Okay, so I want you to just conceptualize yourself and try to create your own definition. So there are objections to virtue ethics as theories. The first and probably the main one is both considered a problem with it, and also for many people, many proponents of it, a good thing of it. It offers few guidelines on specific acts and no clear decision-making procedure. Okay, so it doesn't say, here is how to think to figure out what to do. It instead says, here are some sort of vague things you want to lean towards, go. Okay. Now, a proponent of it might argue back that this is actually a very good thing because every human being is very different from every other one. And we can't assume that certain ways of behaving or navigating this complex world will work for one like it'll work for another. It does not guide agents to consider consequences and other people's perspectives. Some virtue ethics do not focus on social issues nor interpersonal decision making. And it often reflects the cultural expectations of the person, the philosopher who is talking about it, without any reflection or consideration. So culturally specific.